Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Tier 1 Behavior Supports Part 2. And today we want to go back to the end of our Part 1 training, that there was some things that I think we didn't have fully clarified. This is side effect of you guys receiving 20 minutes of a full day training that was broken up, and so it was obvious after a few trainings that we didn't have this fully clarified, and we went back and made some edits. So we want those of you who didn't see it to see the edited version. So when we were talking about procedures and routines, we talked about practicing the procedures, and also we talked about redirecting students who weren't following the procedures. And this is the way to make sure that you're strengthening those procedures, making sure that the students' behaviors related to those procedures are as expected. So, but what we didn't identify is specifically how you might redirect. So, some things to point out. So, if you had a student who was not following a procedure, you might point to a visual that you have related to it and give a direction to the whole group, using that as a way to redirect one or two students who may be off task, or to prompt other students in the classroom who are doing what you are expecting, and highlighting students who are following and compliant with the procedures. Another approach could be that you would approach a student individually and talk with them directly. But again, always redirect the students consistently to avoid strengthening their problem behavior. Catch students following the procedure, praise them. Anytime you have a student who's having difficulty following a procedure and they turn it around and are actually doing what is expected, make sure you catch them doing what is expected, praise them, because that's going to reinforce and increase the rate at which they show that.
Moving on to part 2. During part 2, we are going to be discussing the classroom management checklist tool, the prompting hierarchy, fading verbal prompts, and environmental control. Within this PowerPoint, you will see that we have a teacher self-evaluation checklist. This is a checklist that you can use for your own self-reflection in looking at your classroom and identifying those areas in which you have your classroom management up to par. This is also a checklist that we have shared with administrators, as this is a training that we are working with all individuals district-wide, so they also have had access to this. But the checklist itself is broken down into physical organization and environmental control, and the different components that you can look at within your classroom, whether or not you have those specifics in place, and not just whether or not you have them, but also how long have you been able to put those components in place, and for a consistent time frame. And if not, what are some things that you could do to add those specific areas? Some examples include, is your classroom space arranged to accommodate different groupings? Do you have an area located where you can work with a small group as opposed to a whole group? Is there an area that you can work with a student individually to maintain their privacy? Also, is your furniture set up to support student independence? Are the students able to navigate themselves through the classroom without running into furniture? Are your supplies organized, labeled, and easily accessible to students? Obviously, that will help to promote independence if they're able to locate the items themselves and not have to disrupt the flow of instruction to be requesting where different items are. Does the classroom itself allow for smooth transitions? Do the students use their cubbies for their work, or do they know where to put finished work at times? Are the classroom rules posted? Do you have a voice volume indicator? We will be moving more into that during the training today as well. Do you use active responding techniques to make sure that all students are participating in the lesson? Are students' workspaces clear of any extra materials that could be disruptive to the learning environment? It also moves into pacing procedures and routines. Is there pacing and instruction appropriate for the students? Are you keeping that fast pace of instruction as we discussed in part 1 of this training? Do students understand what to do when they are finished with an assignment? Do you have specific procedures in place for when students are finished the assignment, what they're supposed to do, where they turn in their work? Do you use specific techniques or signals for quickly getting and maintaining students' attention? Do you have some sort of clap or signal that you can immediately gain instructional control and bring all students back on board with you? Do you explicitly teach these routines and review them and practice them? As we discussed in part 1, it's important to make sure that you're not only stating what the routine and the procedure is, but going back and repeatedly practicing that procedure and routine so students remain familiar with them. Do you have established routines for transitions? Do you have established routines for leaving the classroom when a student needs to go to the nurse or use the bathroom or perhaps go to a music lesson? Do you have established routines for special circumstances, fire drills, intruder drills, or something as simple as another teacher coming to the door and requiring your attention? Do you have a class-wide behavior management system? Do students clearly understand how the class-wide system works? A lot of times we have one in place, but the students aren't necessarily completely clear on what that expectation is to move from one level to the next. Are you giving behavior-specific verbal praise when students are being rewarded? So catching them in the moment and actually providing them with that feedback then and there, rather than waiting to the end of the day for them to see perhaps where they fall in the class-wide system. Do you provide students with at least 5 praise statements for every 1 corrective feedback? Yes, we realize that sounds like a lot, but again, the research will suggest that when for every corrective feedback you give a student, that you should be giving them 5 behavior-specific praise statements as well. Do students clearly understand that what reinforcement they receive and what consequences they receive based on the class-wide system? And do you have more individualized interventions for students who are not responding to these? So for those students who are not able to change their behavior based on the class-wide system, do you have individual modifications to what that will be for students who require additional redirection? One of the things we'll be talking about is the prompting hierarchy today. There's many different prompting hierarchies out there. A lot of times you will hear people talk about the most to least prompting hierarchy, and you'll also hear people refer to the least to most intrusive prompting hierarchy. The prompts that we're going to focus on mainly for the inclusive setting is the nonverbal, the verbal, and the physical. We want to focus on fading verbal prompting. This will allow us to gain better instructional control. Research will tell us that the more we use verbal prompting, the harder it is to fade that prompting. And we are also creating our students to become more prompt dependent by the use of verbal prompting. However, as teachers, we can also recognize that verbal prompting is that it tends to be the most immediate prompt that we use. It's easiest to say, Johnny, sit down. Susie, raise your hand, rather than walking around the classroom and providing that physical or gestural prompt to what they should be doing. Becoming more aware within your classroom about how much verbal prompting you're using and recognizing how you can fade that will allow you to gain much better instructional control throughout your entire classroom. You want to try to use more visuals and gestural prompts over that. For example, written lists for routines or in the classroom can help to decrease the verbal prompting, as well as making sure before you move forward with an activity or a task, check for understanding before. Make sure that all students are able to recount exactly what the steps of that assignment or task may be, and then create a visual that they're able to go back and refer to then allow you to eliminate yourself as that additional verbal prompt to bring them back on track. Consider using attention getting signals, such as claps or songs that you can use to gain attention, and gesture to visual cues. Again, it goes back to what we were talking about in part one about utilizing a lot of visuals for procedures. If you have those visuals already set up throughout your classroom, this will enable you to then reduce the amount of verbal prompting by referring back to these visual cues. Use proximity control to reduce behaviors. Rather than calling the student their name when a behavior occurs, you still want to redirect each occurrence, but do so by walking over to them and gesturing or tapping on their desk as to what exactly they're supposed to be doing. With increased proximity, use taps on the student's desk or point to the visual chart of that which has already been reviewed. With environmental control, you want to make sure you set up the physical space of your classroom to be conducive for quick transitions and organizations. Make sure that the classroom space students can navigate through the desks. Make sure that there's different locations within the classroom that the students can identify as to where is the area that they can go to when they need individual help from the teacher. Where is the area if they need to conference with another student that they can go to. But making sure that the physical space itself allows for the students to navigate their way throughout the classroom efficiently. Set explicit rules as to when students can get out of their seats. Make sure that they're aware of the fact of when it is an appropriate time to get out of their seat and when it's not. A lot of students now, we also give additional time or additional space in terms of they require more movement. Identify their space and when it's okay for them to get out of that space instead of just their seat as well. Consider the use of a voice level chart to help students to identify the voice level expected during different activities. Again, we have to not only just identify it and hang that cute little chart in our room that identifies all the voice levels, but actually teach them that and review it with them several times. Let's all practice our outside voice. Let's all practice our inside voice. You could incorporate this into while you're during a reading lesson of having them, okay, let's read this sentence in an outside voice, just so that they're getting to practice that. Let's read this sentence in a inside voice. Let's read it in a whisper voice, just so that they're, again, having the opportunity to continuously practice those expectations that we will be redirecting them for. Keep the momentum of the lesson going by calling on students frequently. Avoid having the same students remain in turn. So making sure that you are not only just calling on other students, but changing the rotation of when they're able to go up and practice something. If you're having students come to the Smartboard to review something, make sure that there's frequent change in who's going up to the Smartboard and how often their students are getting a turn to participate in the lesson, rather than having one person go up and review the entire morning routine. Identify when it's appropriate to call out versus raising a hand, using visuals, again, as to, okay, this is a hand calling time as opposed to everybody responds together. Having that visual and explicitly identifying for students when it's appropriate to call out, when it's appropriate to raise their hand. Remove unnecessary items from the student's work area. Having items on the desk or even just inside the desk can, for some students, work as an appropriate fidget. However, for many students, it becomes nothing more than a disruption. So make sure that the items that are on the student's desk or within the front of their desk inside, that they are either items that are required for them to utilize from a sensory standpoint in terms of fidgets, and or are something that are applicable to the lesson that is taking place. Here are some examples of some great organization that we have found throughout the district. You'll see here that this is a teacher's bookshelf that has everything explicitly labeled and put away. A very highly organized teacher here. You can see that this would also eliminate the need for the students to come up and ask for things, where everything is clearly labeled and the students have access to it. Procedures and visuals of how they can eliminate the need for verbal prompting. Again, if a student's coming up to the teacher, having this visual already posted in their classroom would enable them to be able to send the student back and remind them through a visual reminder of go back and raise your hand, wait for the teacher, say I need help. By having this visual there, it eliminates the need for them to go back and verbally prompt the student, sit down and raise your hand. It actually gives them the steps of everything that they need to do in order to gain access to the teacher for assistance. Another visual there. Am I in the right file? Is this the right time to ask a question? Am I following the teacher's direction? So kind of a self-reflection piece of what they need to make sure they're doing before going to the teacher and requesting help. We talked about the voice level charts. Here are some different examples of voice level charts. On the left is one that is a little more juvenile for the younger grades, silence, whisper, talk, and loud talk. And then it moves a little bit. The one on the right talks to some other levels. This one also includes a little bit more of partner talking. I would encourage you to use one that works with the language that you use within your own classroom. Here's one where you can relate it to a thermometer of exactly how loud you should be getting, starting down at the whisper voice, moving from partner voice to talking voice, teacher voice, and then a playground voice, as well as one on the right where you can put the students' names on clothespins and you can remind them as where they're at. This again would eliminate the need for a verbal reminder by just going over and moving an individual student's clip to let them know, please be quiet or you're too loud, but also allow them to know if they're in the just right zone of I'm quiet. And there's also some other ways that you can increase this to make it a little more exciting for some of the older students. Here's an art room example, incorporating some art into the different levels of the chart as well. For the screaming and shouting, loud voice, inside voice, whisper, or no talking, but utilizing this in advance to let the students know, here's where I expect your voices while you're working on this project, would allow you to proactively identify the expectation, but then also when students test those boundaries and they're going too high on that voice level chart, to then bring that chart back. And again, rather than verbally reminding them, you could bring the visual back and remind them directly using the visual of here's where you're at and here's where I expect you to be. There's also the quick transitions, different chants that assist in the transition back throughout the classroom, whether it be from a desk to the rug or from one center to another or lining up. A few more songs that may help with smooth transitions in order to help you maintain that overall instructional control. This concludes our part 2 of Tier 1. We hope that you find a couple of these visuals and examples that may be helpful, and we look forward to providing some more content to you in part 3.